My name is Monk Rowe for the Phillips Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have Ann Phillips with me today. And I won't do a complete introduction because that would take too long. So I'll say vocalist, composer, producer, and a general survivor of the music business.
Yes,
Does that sound all right?
yes, indeed.
What makes the music business something that you describe as being a survivor of?
Well, let's see. I know too many people who haven't survived. Um, I was very fortunate because I played piano and I could play piano and sing. And so when I came to New York, I didn't have to wait tables. I've done nothing in my life but music. And then the music business began, which is first playing in clubs, some lovely ones, like I played actually opposite Bobby Shorten in his first gig at it wasn't the Carlisle then, it was the Beverly Hotel. And I was the off piano, and I sat there writing names of songs and lyrics down, things I'd never heard. And then I found out about demos for songwriters. And it was a wonderful time. And there were the older songwriters, and there were the new kids coming in, like Carole King and Jerry Goffin and Ellie Greenwich and Neil Sedaka and all those people. And there was a little studio that did most of them, associated. And some of us who have survived the whole thing say we ought to call it Associated University because we learned everything there
Would you
in one
say that
hour.
would you say that music chose you as opposed to the other way around?
Yeah, I had no way I would be doing anything. My parents were not in show business. Was in actually I'm from Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Do you recognize that word? Well, if you look up Taylor Swift, you'll find out that's where she's from.
Well, you have a connection there.
Not really.
Well, do you recall any nowadays I would use the word epiphany. Back then it might have been like aha, like an aha moment, either from recordings or the radio or just something that really reached inside and grabbed you at a young age.
I was always waiting for the next song that was going to be popular, and that's when they were songs. Like Slow Boat to China, things like that coming in on the radio. And because I could play by ear, I read music too, but I could play most of what I heard. I'd just sit down and play it.
Did you hear bass notes? That sounds like a silly question, but when I learn a song off a recording or something, first thing I do is try to figure out the bass notes. And
Uh, yeah, I didn't think of them because I didn't even know the word, but I did hear harmony.
mhm.
And don't ask me how. That's just a gift that I have that I cannot explain.
When you got into doing this work in clubs, singing and playing, I've done a bit of that, and you can tell when people are coming up to the piano to make a request, sort of, and you sort of cross your fingers. You try to keep playing with your fingers crossed. Did you
Yes,
have occasion because the mid to late 50s rock and roll was starting to make the airwaves, and I wondered if you got requests in that genre that you had to like. Oh, I'm thinking of like K-Star, the rock and roll waltz,
yeah,
things that were changing from the swing era.
yes. What was her big hit? Because I couldn't believe it when I heard her. She came in. I mean, this is years later. To Was it Condon's that had this um, afternoon or evening, early evening sing, and Kay Starr came in. I thought, oh, Wheel of Fortune. No, she was a heck of a jazz singer. And of course, there were a lot of those like Rosemary Clooney and Patti Page who were really good singers, but then they had to sing the stuff that was coming in. now. And Mitch Miller, we all know about him.
Oh, right. And how much is that doggy in the window, et cetera.
Right.
Um, well, how did you deal with that? Did you make notes like learn this for tomorrow, learn this for next week?
Nobody ever asked me for that stuff. The clubs I was playing in only wanted to hear the standards, and that's all.
The Great American Songbook type.
That's what you call it now. It
Yes.
was just songs then.
Oh, okay. I want to know about that. I've always wondered when was that phrase sort of invented? It probably
I,
wasn't invented by the musicians either. Usually the phrases are not.
the funny thing you ask that because I called it the American song, or I called it something, and then they called it the Great American Songbook, and I said, "Oh, somebody must have heard me talking," because that's
I
what it is
see.
now.
Yeah.
And now because it's gone into its own slot in the records, not a record store, there are none of those.
Well, you've partly addressed this question, but nowadays and for the last number of decades, we've had a lot much access to a great deal of material first through printed fake books, and now everything's online. You can get the chords on your phone and so forth. What did you do back then to learn these songs?
Well, the piano teacher I had after Miss Ongstad, who wouldn't let me play anything, but I did learn to read music. I think that's good. But nevertheless, then when I was a senior in high school, the piano teacher I had said, I can get you a fake book. They're illegal, but I can get you one for $25. And this is what you should have. So I still have my old first edition. And do you know where they came from?
I do not.
Oh, well, there used to be a service that would send to club date musicians, what we call club date musicians now, um, all the latest songs, and they were little cards like this. And they had this the melody and the lyrics and chords. And somebody, I have no idea who, put them together three to a page. And that became the first fake book. And they were illegal because nobody was getting paid. None of the writers were getting paid for printing these. And so I have one, and my first husband had one too. So I have two old fake books, and you can find anything, you know.
I wonder how you would have felt if you wrote a song and it showed up in these fake books where no one was getting any royalties or et cetera.
Yeah. Well, who's getting what today anyhow when they get a penny for something that got played in Portugal?
That's true. Do you remember any of your best and worst solo piano gigs over the years? That's always a tough question, but I'm thinking of you at that time, and you were playing multiple places. And what's the worst thing that ever happened on a gig?
Well, I think taking the bus from the Port Authority to Wallingford, New Jersey to play at the Wishing Well or the Elbow Room was, and then taking the bus back. I mean, those gigs were from 9 to 3 or 10 to 4 in the morning. And I did that. And it was just me. I didn't have a bass player or anything. It was just me. And when I think of that now, oh my God. And I came through it unscathed. I don't know how.
Did your parents know you were doing that?
They didn't know. I called my mother one time and I said, "Oh, yes, I'm playing in the place. It's Broadway." And she went, "Oh," and I said, "In Passaic, New Jersey." So they had no idea really what that was all about.
There's a phrase that I recall from music school and the group of us who wanted to make it in the music business.
Mhm.
And at the time, I'm not sure we even had a notion of what that was. Some of us wanted, like I wanted to play with Blood, Sweat, and Tears or that kind of thing. And Do you recall at that time setting goals and what did make it mean for you?
No, I'll tell you where I first heard jazz, and this is kind of interesting. My sister, 2 years younger, was a fine artist, and she could draw. And so why I'm missing is outside of Reading, PA. So whoever was coming into town of Reading, she would do a portrait of, and then she would go and get it signed. Anyway, I happen to love Doodles Weaver. Do you remember Doodles Weaver?
A cartoon?
No, Doodles Weaver was the singer with Spike Jones.
Oh,
Oh, Fiddlebum, and so forth, about the horse race and so forth.
indeed, in some secluded rendezvous.
Yes, people do. Yes, exactly. Well, I didn't know anything about jazz, but I knew there had to be something more than Dixieland because I heard people talking about it or hear it in high school. But anyway, so I took my sister out to get Doodle's sign. And it was in this lovely country hotel. And there was a guy playing piano who was a local piano player. And so they were very nice to us little girls. And he signed his picture. And he said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" I said, "I want to sing." He said, "Well, sing something." So I did. Well, the next thing I know, I got a call from a guy, Ron Colina, who lived in Reading and had a five-voice vocal group and was looking for a girl to sing second. And so, as a senior in high school, that was when I realized where I belonged, because twice a week I would drive into his row house in Reading and do these hip arrangements. Did you ever hear of the Skylarks?
Hmm.
George Bruno, I can't quite remember his name, was one of the Skylarks, and he was from Reading. And and Ronnie wrote those kinds of hip arrangements. And so there I was every Thursday and Sunday singing with real musicians, real jazz musicians. And that was the first time I heard a Dizzy Gillespie record, Dizzy Atmosphere. And that's, that's when I discovered jazz. And Ron kept on going. He was a great harmonica player as well, and lived in LA, and we kept in touch somehow in a funny way after years after that. But that was really the start. And then I went to Oberlin and I went into college. Nobody was guiding me. And but I auditioned for the big band and I got that. And then I got weekly radio show. My maiden name is Dinsmore. So it was Denny Dinsmore Sings on WOBC Oberlin. And and anyway, I went there, and then I also sang. We formed the first jazz club because there was no jazz out there. In fact, the conservatory wouldn't let us use the conservatory piano for the concert when we brought Dave Brubeck in.
Right. Yeah.
And that's when I met Dave, and fortunately, we had been in touch because I used one of his songs in the Jazz Nativity, and he was in it, and his son Chris was a king.
Oh, Chris was a king.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So
Was it God's Love Made Visible that you used?
yes, yes.
Yeah. That's such a,
I heard that in the Fiesta de la Posada when it was first done up in Connecticut before it had its real performance. And I just loved it. And so years later, when I was writing the Jazz Nativity, I realized that after the manger scene, what a perfect thing. So I called him and he said, yes.
yeah,
And
lovely. Let me take you back to that. You described working on demos. When you
yeah.
showed up to do a demo, what was usually presented to you? Was a written out vocal line, or was someone just like sort of singing it to you?
Written lead sheet
Mhm.
with just the chords and the melody and lyrics. And in an hour, bass, piano, drums, guitar, I'd sing the vocal and then also do a three-part backup. Finished in an hour.
So that little five-piece vocal ensemble paid off for you.
Oh, did it ever?
Hearing those harmonies and
Yep.
oh,
Yeah.
and
That,
how much did they pay?
uh, I think it was $25 and maybe it was 15 and 5 for each overdub because he was still going reel to reel. It was,
Were the musicians at that time normally able to say, I mean, you could say to them, you know, this is in D. Can we take it up in E flat? It'll sound better. They were capable of that.
yeah, yes. Oh, yeah. Usually if they had a guy singer or something, then they had to put it in a different key. I have perfect pitch. And so it was like having to transpose each note as I sight read it.
Wow.
But the musicians were incredible. Because it was, after the big band era, and so all the people that were with big bands, Everett Barksdale, remember that guitar player with Art Tatum? Everett did a lot of demos. And then as it went on, the newer kids, Al Gorgoni and Trade Martin, the younger kids came in because when Alden Music started and all of the kids from Brooklyn came in, there's a different feel to it. And so the guitar players like Bucky and George and those people didn't have that feel. So the new young kids were playing
You know, Bucky talked about that, how
it.
some people could grab they call it, you know, the straight eighth note feel as a
Right.
the swing. Some people could transition to it and some people couldn't or didn't want to.
Absolutely right. It all changed. And actually, that's how I got into doing record dates because I didn't come in as a jazz person. I didn't ever listen to rock around the clock and all that stuff. But when I started doing the demos for Alden Music mainly and Hill and Range, all of these that were the young writers, and you know what a Carole King feel is, I could do that. I didn't laugh at it as some of the older singers and musicians did. And so everything really changed. And so I really became the hottest call to get singers and record dates because I could get singers that read. They were still written parts and but could get that feel.
You just said an important thing about I translate it as it's not necessary for you to really like something in order to do a good job with it. That you don't have to love a piece of music to give
No,
it your all and to be
no,
professional.
no. But can hardly remember pieces that I didn't like.
Oh,
There was there was one demo I did, which was a sort of oddball thing, not what, from some other studio. And I think it was Liberace's brother had a company that said, "We'll set your song to music." And the people would send in lyrics and they would put them to the same damn tune that was awful. That one stands out in my mind because all the rest of them I did were the for the real pros and those who weren't pros became pros, like little Eva, Eva Locomotion. She was Carol and Jerry's house sitter, took care of the kids. And they were writing Locomotion and Eva sang it and they said, well, let's record it with her. And that demo became a master and a big hit.
I wonder if you ever had an experience where you know, you did a demo and you said to yourself, this is going to be a hit. You recognized it as the potential.
Yeah. Some Burt Bacharach things, because they did a lot for Burt. And I remember being at Bell Sound, there's a guy named Dominic Romeo who did all of the mastering right there. They did the mastering there. And I was walking past his room and Bert and Hal were there and they said, Annie, come in and tell us which side is a hit. And I think it was Dion. I think it was the first Dion. And I think they put it back to back and then had to split it because they were both sides were taking off.
Wow. They
Which,
were both A sides. Yeah.
wow.
Oh,
But the best thing that happened on something that wasn't one of those was a Dick Charles studio, and he called me up and said, I think there's an elderly man who's written a lot of music for the Kraft Music Hall themes and stuff, Vladimir Solinsky. And he has some songs he's had lyrics put to, and I think you're the right singer to do it. And so I did. And they were beautiful, but not hit type songs, but beautiful songs. And about 2 months later, I got a call from the studio, and they said, call Joe Reisman over at Roulette Records. He wants to talk to you. And that's where my album, first one, Born to Be Blue, came, because he had an idea or had a song that he wanted to use as the title song. Actually, that was Lonelyville, and we did the whole recording, and he called the most wonderful arranger, Kermit Levinsky. And there I was, 23 years old, new in the business, and Milt Hinton, O.C. Johnson, Dick Hyman, full string section, Doc Severinsen on trumpet. And so I did that album, it's quite beautiful. And would have, and it got great reviews, and watch this singer, there's no comparison, all that good stuff in Billboard. And then of course it was 59, 60, rock was coming in, so there wasn't any second album. But, and this is an amazing thing that happened, about 15 years later, I was doing some record dates backups in Bell Sound, and this young engineer caught me in the hallway and said, Ann, I was doing inventory here and I found something you might like to have. Don't ever tell anybody who gave this to you. And he gave me a 7.5 copy of the record, which was now Born to Be Blue.
oh.
They discovered that somebody had used Lonelyville as a title song, so they flipped it, and so the B side became the A side, and the first tune on that was Born to Be Blue. And that I, as the years went on, I found out that it was known all over. They had released it in Japan, never told me, but all over the world, people knew it. And I was finally doing another album. I don't think you still call them albums anymore. And the promoter I got, Virginia Wicks, you may have heard of. I sent Born to Be Blue to her, said, this is something I did years ago. And she said, oh my God, I would love to promote that. And I said, well, I don't own it. She said, who cares? So I pressed the CD and it got great reviews. I mean, just incredible reviews. And and more people knew about it and bought it. And nobody ever knew.
What a business. Speaking of writing lyrics, I'm going to read this is an excerpt from an Ann Phillips lyric, and you have to finish it, okay? But no matter how I have tried, this feeling inside.
But how I have tried, feeling inside can't be denied. So what if it's fine? It's home. Now it's fried bananas.
That's right. You get to move on to the next round.
Yes.
You know, when I read that about fried bananas, I got up the Dexter Gordon thing. And first of all, I thought she's going to have the term fried bananas in the lyrics because of the story that went with it. And then I listened to the whole thing, and it's quite clever and quite an accomplishment.
You did hear the whole story of my husband saying, I've not seen you at the piano anymore.
It was like a dare. He dared you to do it or something.
Yes, yeah. And he literally opened up the new fake book, and there was Friday. He said, do that by the time I get home. And I did. And the funny thing is, I use the verse to it now. I've been doing, well, on my birthday party, I did this whole show. And I was a kid the night that I woke and cried, take me to New York City, please, let's ride to New York. That was my nirvana. No more little bitty, gone to New York City. That's all I could see. I dreamed it would be the place that I would reside in, the place that I would call home. And that's the beginning of my telling my story.
Nice. Story and song.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it really is true. My mother did hear me crying, and she ran up the stairs. I must have been about 14. And I said, all my friends have been to New York, and you only take me to Philadelphia.
What did you, this is kind of a silly question, but do you remember what you paid for your first residence, your first apartment in New York City?
Yeah. I think three of us paid $50 a piece, and it was a two-bedroom apartment on the fifth floor. Yeah.
Oh, you've come a long way.
Where I live now, I rented in 1977, and it went condo, and I couldn't buy it then, although it was about a quarter or less of what they, it was like a $3 million apartment. So I'm still living here. Wow.
Hey, name this tune.
Mhm.
All right, let me see if I can pull this off. Starts with a rest. Ba-da, 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 ba, 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 ba-da. Shall I try it again?
Yeah.
We're in the commercial world. One.
Oh,
Da 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 da.
Pepsi pours it on.
That's
Taste
right. That's
the
right.
other cold Pepsi pours. That's mine.
Yes. Um, I'm going to ask you to tell me a story about a jingle from start to finish, but I wanted, before I forget, I wanted to make an observation about that particular um, music that you, it goes up in one key. At one point in the middle of the long commercial, it goes up in one key and it comes back down a half step up. Do you remember that?
Interesting. Well, Pepsi goes up, but it comes back and gets, and it, by the time I go through the bridge, I comes back down to the original key.
Yes, but somehow there's this da 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 da.
In the bridge, ba da 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 dee da, da 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 da, ba da 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 da
Yeah,
dee da, da
yeah,
da da. I
yeah.
wound up back in the original key.
Yeah.
Pretty damn smart.
So, um, I find that whole era pretty fascinating. I've talked to people like Chico Hamilton, who was in that, and Manny Album, and the stories they tell are pretty fascinating. Can you just briefly, if take me from when you first get contacted to do a product
Mhm.
and the sequence of events that ends up with a commercial?
Can I tell you two interesting stories?
Sure.
Okay, first one is at 5:30 at night, Jim Jordan, who was then the president of BBDNO, but he'd been a copywriter, first copywriter to rise to the presidency. And I was doing a lot of stuff for him. And it was about 5:30 at night, and I'm making dinner for the kids. And he says, Ann, listen, the Sheraton account is in Boston, but they haven't been able to do this. Um, it's a telephone number, and can you come in tomorrow at 8:30? And so it was, he said, it's they're switching to the 800 number. So the number is 800-325-3535. And I said, well, can we do it like 800 instead? And he said, yeah, either way, it's all right, right? And so at 8 o'clock the next morning, I was driving into New York to go to BBDO and stand there with the entire account people behind me, and I'm at the piano doing 800-325-3535, which lasted longer than a 13-week promo for the new telephone number.
Were you singing that in your head on the way?
I wrote it on the way in because everything I wrote the night before was awful.
Oh, that's so interesting. Wow. You had to go through the process and um, yeah,
Yeah.
the the deadline loomed.
Yes, it sure did. Many deadlines loomed. Well, just the funniest one, really. Pepsi Cola. Now, they had come alive. You're in the Pepsi generation. Joni Summers singing nice swinging tune. And but it was the early 60s. And the people that were getting married and having kids really didn't grow up on that music. They grew up on the early rock stuff. And so I spoke to several music houses about doing it. I wasn't singing a lot of jingles. I didn't really have that jingly sound as a soloist. And but I did talk to them about doing some, more rock. And they said, well, maybe for a couple of chain products, but not across the board. And so I had happened to meet Scott Muni's brother, who anyway introduced us to Hillary Lipsitz, who was at BBDO. And Hillary believed that that their commercials should be more rock influenced. And so I took Come Alive and I did it first with studio people and then did it with the Hondells, the Four Tops, Martha Vandellas, Del Shannon, that's the name, so forth.
Mhm.
Anyway, and they just went on, they were for the youth market on radio. And then came the new campaign. Now, when a new campaign is born, it's the lyric and what they're selling, how they're going to sell Pepsi, right? Well, the first line that came up, and this time they were not, as later came that they were giving it out to the world and anybody off the street could write it. But this was just given to the four of us, Sid Raymond, I don't think us, but four of us that were had done Pepsi commercials. And so we each had to write. Now, the very first, and I'll embarrass anybody from BBDO, was Pepsi, the generous one.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Which got to be known around the halls of BBDO as Peppy, the generous swan.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yes, because you can't sing that very well.
No,
Generous one.
oh, I wrote it, and we did a demo on it, and the client didn't like it. Well, I hope not. So then they came up with "Taste that Beats the Others Cold." Okay, so we all had to write "Taste that Beats the Others Cold." Thank God I won that competition again. And then Pepsi pours it on was the next line they came up with. So we all wrote that, did a whole demo on it and so forth. And well, they couldn't agree. And so between the client and advertising agency, they said, well, let's put them together and do the whole thing. Right, taste that beats the others cold, Pepsi pours it on. And so I did. And thank God I won that competition too. And that's how I happened to do it with the Four Tops again. And did
When you say you did it with them, so a chart was written,
I
instrumental
wrote it.
chart. You
I
wrote the
wrote
chart, and then you write the vocal parts, and then you have them come in and you sing them the parts or whatever it takes to make this happen.
yes, we did the tracks first. We were by then in at least four track, I believe. And so it could be we could do the tracks and they came in from Detroit, the Tops did, and they called and said, you want our arranger to do it? And they said, no, we have our own arranger, and that was me. So you can imagine when the I don't know, Barry Gordy was there with the Tops, and their manager came in and they see this little chick out there.
Hmm.
And so I did the Tops and she called Martha, Jackie DeShannon, what's his name? I can't think, but anyway, I'll have to send you the Pepsi history
Wow,
because
what a story.
yeah.
Were you one of the few women in that level of the business at the time?
I was really the only one that did not only writing but also doing the arranging, and I hadn't taken arranging lesson one. I got, I mean, first of all, I had done a lot of record dates, so I'd heard a lot. But I also, and I got some tips from good arrangers. But the, what's his name? Big arranger, composer. Um, Sounds and, uh-oh. The thing is, who's the Moon River?
Oh, Henry Mancini.
Henry Mancini's
Yeah.
book,
Hmm.
which really took the complete mystery out of it because I couldn't imagine how those sounds were made. But his book had the piano part and then a CD that had now you put it with these strings, now you put it with four horns, and here's how it sounds. Ah, and of course, I had the best players in the world. When I wrote, the first time I wrote a string chart, first time I wrote a string chart, the string players went, yeah, 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 and I was go, yeah, yeah, yeah. They said, Anne, you have to put this slur over. So that's how much I do. But I could, get the ranges of all the instruments, and one of the arrangers said, just don't do anything to show off of how difficult you can write.
Oh, that's
Make
good advice. Yeah. Was there contractors involved in this that you um, needed to deal with?
Yeah, some of them, but pretty much my first husband and I were in business together at that time, and we really knew. For instance, with strings, the people that I had known doing not demos, but a lot of record dates, David Nadian, who was the concert master for Bernstein. That happened while doing it. But, sometimes I would ask them to put the string section together. And the horn players, I knew, the horn players, and I knew actually for the rock feeling things, um, um, there were piano players, mainly the ones that worked on demos that knew how to get the feel that I wanted. So it was an interesting time because with the rhythm players, they're the new younger players. Gary Chester was the drummer. You've heard his name?
Hmm.
Yeah. And Gary always says, just because I played strip joints, I know how to play this stuff.
The School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
Did you have any say in, all right, there's a tenor sax solo, 4 bars here. I want Jerome Richardson.
Yeah.
Were you able to say that?
I'm hiring.
Mm-hmm.
That's you know, that's but the thing was, for instance, what you call it, baritone sax, Artie Kaplan, who did Locomotion, and I knew Artie from demos and so forth. So if I had that commercial that had that kind of sound in it, I would call Artie.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What would make a studio player not get called back?
not having a pencil. uh, and also questioning things that he could have figured out himself and taking up time.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Yes.
There's some of those people that want, oh,
Yeah, you sometimes wonder if they actually knew, but they sort of wanted to put you in your place or something.
there was
I,
one of those. I
yeah,
remember.
yeah,
Yeah. And I didn't call him back.
yeah. Gee, why isn't my phone ringing anymore? Well, think about it.
Yeah. But the wonderful thing was that everybody was such good friends. I mean, I remember doing a big thing and we finished a take. I think it was one of the Pepsi things. It was a big thing. And whoever was in the booth said, "I'll buy that." And from the back of the percussion session, George Devon said, "I'm not selling." And oh, I'll tell you, one of the great things. I mean, there was just so much fun and camaraderie on it. I was doing a session. Um, contracted the voices for. Oh, come on, come on, come on. Okay, I'll get it in a minute. But nevertheless, uh, and the voices were in a booth, and a connecting booth was the artist, who was Sammy Davis Jr. And just Klaus Ogerman. There we are. And Klaus had his hands up in the air, and I'm in the booth with my hands up, ready to cue the singers. When Sammy leans out of his booth and grabs my arm, and he says, "You see all those little brown spots? Did it ever occur to you that if they got together, you'd be colored?" Klaus heard not a beautiful ooh.
That's terrific. Did you ever work with Joe Wilder?
Oh, yes.
Oh, what a delightful person he was.
Yes, absolutely. See, those were the people that were around and playing record dates, all those greats.
It's funny, Dick Hyman made a comment at the time playing some of those pop tunes, and they would joke about, just think in 20 years, people were saying, they're playing our song. And he says, and they were. That's what happened.
Yes. That was funny. Artie Butler. Do you know Artie?
Yes, I do.
Um, but Artie, some years ago, said, remember how dumb we used to think some of those songs were? Today they sound like Mozart.
Well, I'm fascinated. I love just the arrangements that go into these things, and there's a lot to be learned from that. When you created those commercials, a lot of times they were a minute long, sometimes more, sometimes less. But what goes through your head now when you watch television and they fit like three commercials in 20 seconds?
12 commercials in a minute and a half. I can't stand it. And there's no music of any sort. I mean, here and there they'll use a standard because the person who was selected that song, it has the same amount of syllables, you know, the product or something.
Yes. How did you price your work at the time? Was there a standard musicians union or thing involved?
Honey, not for creative. Creative was whatever you set it for. It was around 2,500, 3,000 or something for that. And then the union things were what they were. But the creative was never a union thing, or it would have been ridiculously low.
Use that term again, the creative.
Yeah, I'm talking about writing the song,
Okay.
because almost everything I did, I wrote the song as well.
Mhm. And was it judged as simply as, all right, this is 8 bars, this is 16, or this is a 30-second commercial? Did that play into a pricing?
Not too pricing, no. No, in fact, I wish I had realized I should have gotten paid for the little blue flame for American Gas, which was da 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 da. I just did that at the end of the first commercial and kept doing it because I did a whole lot of those, and those were 30s, 60s, and 90s, and there were some beautiful stuff. But after years went by, I said, I should have gotten some money for that blue flame.
Wow. How did you, last question about this. Did you have to do anything extraordinary in the beginning to get the respect of the studio musicians?
No, they just respected what I did and they played it and nobody, I mean, the one musician that I remember that kept making corrections and I didn't use again. But there was never anybody like that. I mean, all of the people that were in it, we enjoyed each other. We had a good time together, and I know that they respected me.
I suspect that many of those players were happy to be off the road, still
Yeah,
playing well conceived music and being able to go home at night.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yep. I think so. There were Selden Powell. Who do I just remember so many of them that were on these sessions because they were in New York now and they could read and they, you know, because on a regular record date, it was 3 hours and you could do four sides and you usually did three or four. And, they were all good musicians and had a good time being there. So, and their scale was their scale, which was the union scale for it. I mean, I
Yeah.
know the singers were like $60 for a record session, and it did go up and up, but it was
What's the state of the musicians union now? Are you aware of that?
no. I mean, the thing is that so much has been done in synthesizers, and I don't know if anybody writes anything real anymore. I mean, have you listened?
Yeah.
I heard
Well,
something.
your timing was good then.
Oh, it was the best because there was work for singers. It was really one. If you could read, you had to read. And that's why when I was teaching at NYU and I started a class, because these kids are paying 60 grand a year, probably 80 now, and they're not learning to read music and they're music majors. Come on. And so I started a class for sight reading for singers and another one for repertoire, because another one of the problems was they didn't know, standards. And I opened that to musicians as well. Well, they didn't come. And a lot of the young musicians don't know any standards. They go back to, you know, it's, I think they're finding out that they have to now, but it was a long period with
Uh-huh.
them.
They're not going to get called for a club date and playing their own music.
No, exactly.
Hey, come on down, bring your original tunes.
Yeah, right. Everybody can't wait to hear them.
One last thing with this, Chico Hamilton talked about, he did this for 15 or 20 years, and this is a quote from him. He says, I started in 66 until the 80s, maybe, a long time. I learned how to drink in the daytime, the three martini lunch, and how to schmooze. I made a lot of dough, but what good is the dough when you kind of lose something? So, do you know what is that something that he would have felt?
I certainly know it about guys that went into Broadway, because Broadway gigs was like the bottom of the barrel during that time when there were record dates and so forth. And then when those dates began to go away and people began to take Broadway jobs, they lost something. And they talked about losing that something. And, I don't know. I was fortunate because I was writing most of what I did. I mean, I did the first record dates. Of course, all record dates were wonderful, but I was working with Charlie Colello, who did all the Four Seasons stuff, and other stuff. And the record dates were well written, were good stuff and fun. And so as a rhythm player, I mean, Gary Chester was the main one, and there were others. And the guitar players changed to the younger guys. Have you heard, do you know Al Gorgoni?
What's the name?
Al Gorgoni.
No.
He's one right. He's a wonderful guitar player, classical as well as, you know. But he was one of the young guys that I met at Associated. And then when I started doing commercials, then he was one of the main ones I called, you know, because they could get that feel.
Yeah. It's important to know in those situations what to leave out too as an arranger,
Oh yeah,
right? Stepping on the vocals and
absolutely. In fact, one of the things that they don't teach anywhere is how to be an accompanist to a pianist for as a pianist, how to be accompany a singer, because that's an art in itself. And a lot of the young guys are not learning that at all, and they're all over the place. That was a story from NYU, but they gave me somebody that my singer said, I could sing that at my lesson, but he can't sing. I said, no wonder I couldn't come in on that intro in a million years because it was just all over the place and he's playing through her. And now, come on, you're supposed to make that singer lift her up, make it wonderful. And there are very few young, Ted Firth is one that has really taken the place of the Mike Renzis of the world. But there are not many guys around that really accompany well, and they certainly don't teach it in a school.
at the end of this article I have from you, you used the word joy a lot. You
Oh,
know, keep the joy. And you just made me think of it because a good accompanist has to be joyful in what they do. That has to bring them joy that they are assisting musical performance.
yeah, absolutely. You know, and there are wonderful ones that do exactly that. And if you don't feel that joy, if it's say a lot of pianists are there to show themselves off, and so accompanying a singer is a dumb gig. That's a foolish idea.
Yeah, I totally agree. So briefly, bending towards the light is in how many years now?
This will be the 40th if I do it this year.
If you do it this year.
It's been done in last year. It was the first time in Tucson. It's been done for 30 years in Greensboro, North Carolina. They do it every single year. And Bozeman, uh, Montana, they did it. But the problem is that unless you can prove to a publisher, it was with Schirmer for the first 10 years. And the only performances that came through Schirmer were ones that I found. And then I took it back, and now I have shipped it myself. But unless you can get it on television, and we did have a wonderful producer, she's a major producer, who did for PBS, and she presented it to them. And we had everybody, Dave Brubeck, Lionel Hampton, Tito Puente, you name it. And the place to do it, we're going to do it in October at the Apollo so it could be on the air, and they said yes to it. However, you'll have to bring it to us ready for air. You know what that means?
That means a lot of money.
It means a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
At that point, it was 350,000 was the budget. And that's nowhere near what it would be today. And and so the publishers now Samuel French did publish, I have a children's show, The Great Gray Ghost of Old Spook Lane. Anyway, and I went to talk to them recently and I couldn't find them because they have now been bought by Concord Theatricals. Concord Theatricals is another big bit. It was Concord Records, the jazz label originally of California, but it has grown and it now owns Andrew Lloyd Webber, Bernstein, or what's called Hammerstein, Rogers and Hammerstein, all of that. They license. And so to license it, they want to know that it's going to sell like crazy the first year. Well, if it's not on television and nobody knows what it is, it won't.
Yeah.
So that's where I am after all this time, because it's been done in about 40 or 50 cities, and every place it's been done by their local people,
Like
which,
Utica, New York.
well, in New York, it's done by
Utica,
local.
in Utica here, we did it.
Oh,
We
that's right. You were in Utica.
yes, outside Utica. Yeah.
That's
Yes, I
yeah,
saw it. You probably were there.
I was. Yes.
It's a wonderful production. I'm guessing that you have significant powers of persuasion.
Not with big corporations.
Yes, right. There is a limit to that. But I envision the whole idea and then approaching these musicians and you you did well.
Well, it's very funny because that first year, nobody knew what it was. I mean, I got the very first year I did it. I had Grady Tate, Tommy Flanagan, George Mraz. I can't remember, but and good band and so forth. And they all did it. Um, it's the second year. There's a whole story in between that you don't want to hear. But nevertheless, the second year, I remember calling Doc Cheatham was a one of the three kings. Now, all I had money for was to rehearse in the afternoon. I have band rehearsal before, and then the day of the show, we run the show and then do the show. So it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were supposed to be running the show, and and what's his name?
Doc,
Yeah, wasn't there. And I called him up and he said, "Oh, I'm just having my lunch." I said, I'm going to play a couple of Christmas songs, right? I said, no, because we had no concept of this being a show. And it's quite different when you're working with musicians and you want them to come forward here and. But we have a director now, Beth Ann Kennedy, who is really can connect with the first couple of directors didn't really connect with the musicians as well, but they love it now and you know or thank me for, I had this year in New York I had Ron Carter and I was Ron as a special guest. Now he played it in the very second show. And he never forgot it because every time I'd see him somewhere, he'd say, "Oh, that was so great," so forth. But I hadn't had him in the band since. But this time I decided to ask him to be a special guest, which is after the whole play itself, and then it goes into the celebration of Deck the Halls when all these different people come out and play. And that's where I was going to put him. And he said, "Well, who's your bass player?" I said, "Dean Johnson." He said, "Can I use his bass?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll call him. I don't think he'll have a problem with that." And I will tell you, it was utter magic because it was during the finale and it was right after the tap dancers. So there was this, all this, it was big. And then absolute silence. And he went down and Dean handed him his bass. And there was wood floors for one thing. The sound was extraordinary and utter silence from the audience because they really couldn't believe who they were seeing and hearing. And it was just gorgeous. And the next day I got a call from him. He said, "What's your address? I want to send you something." And in it was his book. That's the Smithsonian interviews. It's a gorgeous book, color and so forth, with the bid and to Anne, "Thank you, Ron." He's thanking me. So that's how much the musicians love it.
it's interesting you said that about sort of corralling the musicians and said, okay, after this number, then you have to go over here. And I had that experience doing a show with a singer, a Billie Holiday show, and she would say, after this thing, you say this, and then I'll say this, and like was going, what do you mean? It's theater.
Yeah, right. We could never get Phil Woods to come forward enough. We let him wear his hat as a crown, but he was,
Okay, darn. Well, you are just have accomplished so much in your lifetime, and um, you still have projects going on for the future?
Well, I got a nice thing. I belong to the New York Women's Music Composers thing. And every once in a while, but there'd be something that a performer is looking for. And there was a piano thing, a pianist that wanted, well, okay, I'll send the thing in. And it was a rag that I wrote for a play with music called Panhandle many years ago. And anyway, I loved the rag, but I could never do anything with it. It's a piano rag. Although one of the performers in the show ran up when I played it at the first rehearsal. He said, "What is that?" And I said, "I wrote it." And he said, "Oh my God, I thought it was Scott Joplin that had disappeared or something," which was the nicest thing he could say. Anyway, I just got a thing from a woman who's a pianist who's doing a concert, and she's playing my rag in that concert at Opera America on the 19th. And then I've been doing, my birthday thing. I did a short show at a senior residence, which is telling my story. And then I made it bigger for the birthday party. And that got sold out. And so many people have wanted to see it again. So I have a real interesting one woman, about an hour, 15, hour and a half show that really goes through my life of music and covers a lot of ground.
I'll bet. And I can see many moments where people going, "Oh, I remember that. You wrote that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you did demos for Ellie and
Wow.
Leader of the Pack. I have to tell you a funny thing. When they did a show on Leader of the Pack after it was a big hit. And I took my kids when they were in the middle school, so to see it because Ellie Greenwich was starring in it and so forth. And I introduced her to Ellie, and Ellie looked at them and said, "I am your prenatal influence." Because I had three kids through all of this.
Wow. Well, this has been a great pleasure, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And maybe we'll get to meet sometime in some little dive in New York City. Who knows?
Who knows? If I do my story again at Pangea, I'll let you know.
All right. Well, I'll pause this and when we'll say our goodbyes. Thanks again.
Okay.